Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Michael. I farm here in the Canadian prairies. My parents started here in the late 90s, and together we've slowly grown it from a small dairy operation to a medium-sized grain farm. Over the last 25 years, I've collected a lot of pictures and videos, and I thought it would be fun to do something with them. So join me as I walk you through the past and to the present, as we go from dairy to grain, in future videos on this channel, I'll bring you along for the current growing season. But for now, let's go back in time and see how we got here. Let's start off with some pictures. We'll get to the videos after too. By the time I was in my early teens, I got a hold of a digital camera and I took pictures all the time. This is probably around the mid-2000s here. I don't have too much footage of the early years. This is before phones had cameras on them. So I had to remember to bring the digital camera out if I wanted to film anything. But yeah, we started as a dairy operation, did that for a lot of years. We raised our own calves. We harvested and collected our own feed for the winters. Here you can see we upgraded the milking parlor shortly after we started farming here. Since we could only milk 5 cows at a time, it was quite slow. You can see during construction we had to keep milking, so we had to do one side at a time. That's my grandpa. We also did an extension of the barn on the right side there. And he was very proud of that. He wanted to be in the picture there. We don't have a lot of pictures of this, but we did grow corn for feed at the beginning. We chopped it ourselves with this small machine and made silage bags out of it. But we soon did green feed and bale and silage. We used this old seeder here to seed barley or oats. And that was our contraption to get the seed from our trailer into the press drill. It worked pretty good for many years. Here you can see the yard and our silage bales. There's footage of how we do that later on. Here's us cutting green feed, raking hay. There's my bale picker. That was my job while my dad baled. This allowed me to pick the bales on my own, and here we have the wrapper. There'll be a video later of how that works. Making feed in the summer was always my favorite part, even when the weather was always something you had to stress about. But let's look at some videos I found of the early years. This is our yard. There's that press drill. There's our old farm dog. Cows grazing outside. Between milkings, morning and evening, they were allowed to go outside on the pasture. And here's that green feed that was soon ready to be cut and baled and wrapped up. We started with the cutting machine that's called a haybine. I'm not sure if it's called something else, but it has tiny little knives to cut in a reciprocating motion. It works well for the most part, but it has trouble during wet conditions or when there's too many dirt molehills in the field. The knives would plug up and you would have to get out and free the machine by hand, and that's not very fun. and that can be dangerous as well. We later upgraded to a disc bind, which has rotating knives, more like a lawnmower, and that worked much better. That's our hay rake. It turns the grass and combines two swaths to make one bigger one, and makes the baling faster, but also lets the underside dry a bit. Whenever we made fresh feed, there would always be a hawk or two landing on the fresh bales, looking for field mice. There's the bale picker in action. I think there's video of it later, of how it actually picks up the bale from the field and puts it on the trailer. But this let me do it by myself instead of having a tractor and trailer with a fork and having it to do one bale at a time. And it let me unload it a lot faster too. Here you can see the bale wrapper in action. It lets you create silage bales from green feed. With this whole setup, it was only my dad and I, and we could make 1,000 bales for the year that would last us through the winter. Just the two of us, without hiring extra help. Of course, you always had to watch the weather when you're making feed. And here I think we were caught in a hailstorm. Here are some of our older replacement heifers. They were attached to the side of the barn in biotech. We've always had donkeys alongside our cows in our pastures to protect them from coyotes, but they're also just cool. This is our feeding table for the milking cows in the barn. There's that green feed, the silage that we unpacked. There's a mom and her twins. Here you can see the upgraded milking parlor after construction was finished. Now we could milk 7 cows at a time, on each side taking turns. So while you milked one side, you prepped the next side by cleaning them. Some of the older replacement heifers were kept outside, and I think I'd take you along here to give them their daily morning treats. Basically a growing ration to help with mineral intake and the like. I figured I would split this up into different seasons. So another winter passed, and here's that disc mine that we upgraded to. There's that biotech on the right where the calves were kept. Our adventures into grain farming started with this machine, this old swather. It had no air conditioning. It was pretty rough. Here we used it to cut some green feed though. This machine here we used to seed alfalfa as well, and then we had to buy a roller to roll in the alfalfa seed. And this was my first GPS. No auto steer, I had to follow the lines. Our first ever grain crop here is being harvested. We rented a combine for that. There'll be video of it later on. As you can see, you can go so much faster with a disc bine versus a hay bine. I seem to have disturbed the peace of the mama deer and her baby. But they made it and they hopped off into the bush after. Here's that swather we bought and tested it out on some yellow clover. And it also worked okay in the alfalfa. The biggest tractor we had for cultivating fields was this Magnum case. Worked pretty well. I think it's only a 24-foot cultivator at the time. We had to cultivate ahead of seeding because this press drill did not penetrate the soil on its own. Here you can see that contraption we made in order to fill the drill. And yeah, for many years I used the 125 horsepower Kubota tractor here to do all our seeding. Did not use GPS for seeding, we used the field markers on the side of the press drill, and then I had to follow the line. Okay, here we go, our first crop is being harvested. We rented this combine from a local dealer, an old John Deere 7720. It was slow going, but it was still fun. And you can see one of our friends baling the straw for his own cattle. We didn't need any more straw for the year, I think. And before we had any grain trucks, we used a tractor and trailer to transport the harvest back home. Another year, another winter. This is the year we bought our first grain truck, a cab over GMC. I think it was 1986 that is the year. And we also purchased our first grain bins that we put alongside our barn. And our first crop of wheat is being seeded there. We also got our first combine that we didn't rent. This is a Case 2166. Pretty small, but it was definitely an upgrade from that old John Deere. That year we grew oats and wheat, alongside still making feed for our cows that we were still milking for a few more years to come. Up until now we had no local storage on the yard for our grain. We had some friends and neighbors that had empty bins for us to use in the past. But this year here, I believe it was 2014, we purchased our first grain bins, and here they are getting stood up. That was pretty exciting to watch. In the summer, the cows can graze, but of course need food for the fall, winter, and spring. So here we are doing another cut of alfalfa. This was probably the second cut. Here I think I finally show how the bale picker works. This was pretty hard to film and operate it all at the same time one-handed. So you'll have to forgive the camera shake. Finally, it was time for swathing the oats. And putting that new combine to the test. By new, of course, I mean a 1997 Case 2166 that we bought at an auction, I think for $17,000 only. And it was nice to be able to haul the oats back to our own yard this time and put it in our own storage bins. Straight cutting the wheat was the better choice here instead of swathing it. That year it was pretty wet in the fall and it rained on and off. We were worried that if we did swath the wheat, it would rain on it too much and they would not dry up. Another year goes by, another winter of feeding cows and milking cows and clearing snow. But spring eventually does arrive, and that spring we were planting canola for the first time, and here we have our roller that we purchased to press the little canola seed in the ground that we just floated over top. I also attempted to do my own spraying, but I think we still hired out help as well. We finally upgraded our tractor and seeder for the following year, but we purchased it after we had already planted for the season. Here you can see we had 4 tractors with the help of some neighbors to lift that old shed and move it to somewhere else on the yard and expand it. So we would have more storage for machines, and then where this shed stood, we'd have room to actually work and turn around in the yard. It was quite tight there before. And we bought our first actual workbench. But the main reason for moving the old Quonset shed is for this here, to build a new, bigger shed that we can park our combine, seeder, the 4x4 tractor, etc. and not have it out in the elements all year round. And I could park the combine with a 25-foot header without taking it off straight in there after days of harvest. That was pretty nice. Of course, the cows needed to eat for another year, so more feed is being made. This is what happens when you leave your tractor door open for too long unsupervised. Not all of the grain that we planted gets harvested with the combine. It gets cut and baled and wrapped for silage. And here's footage of that shed being moved. After we lifted it up on all four sides with 4 tractors, it was time to put it on its new foundation. This was quite the slow process. But our second ever crop of wheat was ready to harvest, so here we go. And just like that, another year passes. Lineups at the elevator as we deliver our first crop of canola. Unfortunately, I don't know if I have footage of harvesting the canola. We expanded to one more bin on that side of the barn. There was room for one more. That brought our total storage up to 16,000 bushels. You can see we also purchased our first swing-out auger. Along with moving that old shed and building a new one, we needed to redo our power situation and electrical. So we buried all our lines and we built an electrical shed where everything met. And in case of a power failure, we could also use a generator here to power the whole yard. And here is that new tractor and seeder finally getting some action. That year we did our first crops of soybeans as well. And of course we're still cutting green feed, baling and transporting it home and wrapping it up for feed for the winter. We also upgraded our sprayer to a pull-type high clearance. And yet again we needed more storage for grain, so here we have 2 5,000 bushel bins being constructed on the yard this time. We purchased another grain truck, an old Volvo. Used it here to haul seed and used it for harvest later on as well. It was nice being able to load the seed into the air cart here all by myself versus the old method with that old press drill. And here's my dad picking rocks as I'm seeding. A lot of our land has rocks on it. And then just to make sure the rocks stay in the ground, you roll them down, the ones you can't pick. You don't want those in the harvester later. In late spring, it was always time to let the cows out of the barn for the first time onto their pasture. It was fun to watch them. They were so excited. It was time to get some spraying done on the fields. I finally get to try out the one we bought as well. It worked pretty well for a few years, but we didn't end up keeping it. There were too many issues with the booms not being able to unfold or fold back in right when you needed it the most. And finally, some auto steer. Instead of our poor Kubota that has had so many hours working really hard, cutting and seeding, now we've used the Magnum to cut with. It had quite a bit more power. Over that next winter, we sold that old grain truck with the cab over and bought an old semi-truck at an auction and put that box on this semi. It had quite a bit more power than the old truck. We also bought a pup trailer to haul behind, so now I could haul almost twice as much grain to the elevator. Our first combine, the 2166, was quite underpowered now, so we upgraded to a 2388. We did keep the old combine too as backup. We also upgraded our swing-out auger. It was quite a bit longer, as well as getting a hold of some heavy harrows to harrow in the straw after harvest. And here are some soybeans in the snow. That year it rained non-stop in the fall and we had to wait until the ground froze to be able to harvest. Our 4x4 tractor got an upgrade from an old Versatile to a new Versatile, from 230 horsepower to 360. We're getting closer now to what we actually have still on the yard as of today, but this was quite the exciting upgrade to this John Deere S680 combine, as well as going for my Class 1 license and being able to drive an actual semi-truck and trailer. And as I said earlier, we go back to a pull-type ground unit. You never have a problem unfolding that in the field when you need to go spraying. Maybe we were just unlucky, but this thing is way more reliable. At this point, we stopped milking our cows and we sold our dairy herd. We do still have cows around our yard, they're just not ours anymore. They're neighbors that rent our pastures. But here we have our last new set of bins going up. This is where we used to store our feed. In this area we had the bale wrapper going in the previous years. And it was time to start seeding again for the year, this time with the upgraded 4x4 tractor. And using upgraded GPS and auto steer as well. Here I'm still in the old combine before I have footage of the new one. But this is the reason we upgraded in the first place. I could never keep up with harvesting fast enough. We have our neighbor here helping, and a friend also helping. So we had 3 combines going in the canola at the same time. Here's the new combine now. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and join me next time for videos on this year's growing season.